Hello and welcome back to the series Masters of the Chessboard. In this series we are looking at the games out of the famous book Masters of the Chessboard by Richard Reti, and we're looking at each of the games in that book one at a time and Reti's analysis of those games. Now we are continuing to look at the games of Frank James Marshall, who has the white pieces. This is the second Marshall game, and it's the last one where he will be the focus of our attention. However, he will come up as opponents to some of the future masters in the future games. His opponent is Harry Kline, and the game started off with Marshall playing d4, with d5, c4, going into the Queen's Gambit, e6, going into the Queen's Gambit declined, knight c3, knight f6, knight f3, bishop b7, bishop g5, going into the most common version of the Queen's Gambit declined at the time. Now here we have knight b to d7, e3, castles, rook c1, and now b6. And we've seen a lot of this opening before. A lot of similarities. We've seen where black has placed their knights here and they've pushed b6. And the idea is to try and develop the bishop, because the bishop has no good squares to try and develop too, because the pawns are on light squares. Now here we see c takes d5, e takes d5, and Marshall's happy to make this exchange now because he wants to try and attack the weak light squares around black's position, and also black's bishop is still not free to develop because the knight is in the way. So he's not really giving black a chance to develop the light square bishop onto the newly opened diagonal. Now here we see queen a4. Now in a previous game by Harry Pillsbury, we saw bishop to d3, followed by castles, knight e5, and then h4, h5. Not too dissimilar to the previous Marshall game we saw. However, in this game, we see more of the modern procedures that we were talking about in Pillsbury's game, where this b6 pawn creates a few weaknesses in black's position. Primarily this weak c pawn here, and this weak c6 square as a result of this b6 pawn push. And the main idea is with this rook on c1, white is able to control the c-file and control this c6 square. Now, to utilize this plan, Marshall is playing queen a4, intending to play bishop to a6 to exchange off the light square bishops, because then he'll be able to utilize this weak c6 square a little bit more. Now, Reti does comment that in this game, black doesn't defend that well. However, black's difficulty defending sort of shows is quite thematic for showing some of the weaknesses that are in black's position and how they can be exploited, some of the risks that can be exploited. Now here we see bishop to b7, and Reti comments that it might be natural to think that this is perhaps a bit of a waste of a move, because bishop a6 is going to be coming to exchange the bishops, so you're basically spending a move here and then another move taking, or another move recapturing. So he says that instead it might be worth considering something like c5 to instead of developing this bishop, c5 to try and remove the potential weakness of the c6 square. However, he says that this does lose a pawn after queen c6 attacking the rook. You might see something like rook to b8, and then knight takes d5, and this is the main idea. There's now two attackers on this pawn and only one defender. So after knight takes d5, obviously if knight takes back, queen takes, it's quite straightforward. Or you probably want to take the bishop first. So knight takes, queen takes d5, because bishop takes a knight will jump back. So queen takes d5, and then everything's sort of defended still. But the more accurate move might be something like bishop to b7, But then after knight takes e7 with a check, queen takes c7, you're able to get your queen out. And Reti comments that this c5 pawn push therefore does lose a pawn by black. However, he does say that black does have a very big lead in development, and this consequently some masters have recommended c5 in that position, essentially giving up the pawn for a lead in development, and they think they've got equal compensation. And actually looking at the computer evaluates this as being equal, which indicates that the opening has been successful for black in that regard. Now in a game we don't see c5 defending the square, we instead see bishop to b7. And as expected, bishop to a6, that's the entire reason Marshall played queen a4. If bishop takes a6, queen takes a6, and now c6. And Reti comments that something like c5 might appear a bit more active and freeing. However, after castles followed by rook to d1, this d5 pawn will come under quite a bit of pressure, and it might be quite difficult for black to be able to hold on to it. So, because of the weakness that might be present with the d5 pawn, we see c6 be played. Now we see castles, and now knight to e4. And Reti comments that this loses a pawn. However, black's position was already quite awkward and difficult to gain good active play, because there's quite a few weaknesses in the pawns. Like the c6 pawn is still quite weak, the a7 pawn is quite weak. Black's pieces are all sort of tied up, they haven't really got any good squares at the moment. Now in the game we saw knight e4, which Reti comments loses a pawn. And this is because queen takes e7, queen takes e7, and now Reti comments that Marshall will now play some very active moves which will force resignation. And that starts with queen to b7, attacking the c6 pawn and pinning the knight. We see rook f to c8, defending the pawn, but then knight takes d5. And now we see how the pawn has been lost. Like if you take, check, check, and you just down the material. So see, knight takes d5 because the pawn is pinned to the rook. Oh, and the queen is also attacked, so queen d6. And now we see rook takes c6, and here black resigns. Now the threat, if we just play a bit of a nothing move, is obviously queen takes rook takes queen. That's so obvious, but I think the main threat would be the threat of mate. If they were to play any other move, the threat is, well, not quite a mate because of knight f8. But here you've just lost two rooks. Now if black were to take on c6, it doesn't quite work out, because after queen takes a8, it comes with a check. And let's say you were to block the check, then you can take on c6. Because after queen takes c6, you have this check, forking the king and the queen. The computer gives knight to b8 to try and defend, but this also doesn't work because we have the move knight to e5 attacking the rook. So let's say you try to defend the rook with something like rook to c8. Well, again, queen to b7 attacking the rook, threatening potentially mate. If you play rook f8 trying to defend, then again knight to e7 will come with check, and the queen has to take here because king to h8 would lead to mate after knight takes f7. Rook takes f7, queen to c8 check, queen to d8 take, take, and that's mate. So that's why after rook takes here, black resigned, because no matter what, they're going to be losing quite a significant amount of material. And there's going to be a lot of tactics based on whatever move black makes. And that's the main issue, that this knight to e4 move, after the exchange, allowed this queen to b7, which exploited a lot of the weaknesses in the black queen side. And any attempts to defend it would have led to this knight takes d5. And in this position, white's already got a pretty big advantage. The computer actually gives queen to e6 here. However, after knight takes e4 is what's given by the computer, d takes e4, knight to g5 is given. And then the game will continue, but it gives white quite a nice advantage. It says white is plus 1.7 because they're going to probably win this pawn as well in a minute. But that's the main idea as to that's the main theme of this game. The weakening of the black queen side with this b6 push and how to exploit it by exchanging off the light square bishop and then bringing the queen in through the light squares. Although this knight to e5 move is probably what loses the game, because before that, in this position, it is equal. However, white's probably got a bit of an easier way to play. But that's the game. That's game number 38. The second and last game of Marshall, where he's the focus. And the next person we're going to be looking at is Akiba Rubinstein. So if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching.